Hello and welcome to the IdeaCast interview series, episode number 130. My guest in this episode is Dr. Keith Frankish, and Keith is an honorary professor in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Sheffield, UK, also visiting research fellow at the Open University, also in the UK, and adjunct professor with the Brain and Mind program in Neuroscience at the University of Crete in Greece. I have been entertaining the idea of having Keith as a guest if he would be willing to come on. I've followed his work for a couple of years, initially resistant to his theoretical framework, and have come around a little bit and still have some critical questions that were all asked in good faith, and of course by a layperson like me. There's some caveats there. I'm not at his level. It's very asymmetrical, but we had a great conversation. He was very accommodating to what I just mentioned about my being a curious general audience person, and so we did have a good conversation, and I appreciate his coming on and having a conversation with me. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Thank you for being here. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Keith Frankish to the IdeaCast interview series. Normally I say I would like to welcome, but I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Frankish to the IdeaCast interview series because we've been working behind the scenes in the background for a while to get you on board, Keith. And so welcome. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you, Justin. It's a pleasure.
And it's a pleasure for me to host you and to be able to ask you questions, to have your audience for a few moments. And as I will disclaim to the audience, because my subscribers already know this, and I'm not an educated person. I'm a folksy, intuitive, general audience kind of person. But sometimes from like the mouths of babes, sometimes you get ideas that are, or questions that might not be up there in the lofty heights of academia. So that could be bad or good, and we'll find out. So to the folks who are coming here who don't know me but are here to listen to Keith, that's what you're getting. Is it's a somewhat asymmetrical conversation, but I'm very much invested in what Keith has to say and what the opposing arguments are, and other people that have interacted with Keith, et cetera, et cetera. So here we are. Keith, what I would like to do, and to the audience, I would also say that if you're not familiar with Keith's work, I have in the description field probably about 8 different conversations or lectures that Keith has delivered that will give you insight. They're PowerPoint presentations. He very carefully outlines his theoretical framework. We're going to jump right into a conversation as though we all watched that and have a good basic understanding of where Keith is coming from. So having said that, Keith, what I would like to start with is maybe lay a foundation. And I know Dan Dennett very much impressed upon you a lot of the ideas that you carry forward. But in my discerning your work, I think that there's a departure from what Dennett had talked about with eliminativism versus your illusionism. So if we could start there and see, is there a genuine departure from some of the ideas that he put forward, or that eliminativists or physicalist and eliminativists put forward as their theoretical framework? Is there departure there, or is there some convergence and overlap?
That's a good question. Maybe more difference of emphasis, perhaps.
Okay.
I don't think there are deep differences, and Dan was happy to adopt the illusionist label. Indeed, when I picked up the term from his work. I think perhaps I try to reach out to people on the other side, as it were, people who have strong convictions about the nature of the mind, the reality of certain kinds of mental properties, in a way that perhaps Dan didn't. But I think Dan thought they were, they'd really been corrupted by bad philosophy, and that if they could just think it through clearly, they would see that there wasn't a problem here. My position is more that no, I don't think it's just a matter of bad philosophy. I think there's something about the nature of the human mind and the way in which the human mind knows itself that tempts us to adopt, perhaps even forces us to adopt, if when we're not being philosophers, a certain picture of the mind, which I think is fine for everyday purposes. I think it might even be adaptive. It might even be something that evolution has equipped us with as a useful useful tool. But I don't think it's a good basis for doing science of the mind or for doing metaphysics. I don't think we should take it too seriously. Here's an idea I've been playing around with a little bit. I mean, think about something like solidity. I mean, this table here, right? This is solid, right, in front of me. I go out and feel it's solid. There's a sense in which philosophers would and scientists would tell us it's not solid. It's if you, from a certain perspective, from a microphysical perspective, it's largely composed of space. Atoms are largely empty space. So there's a sense in which it's not solid. But the solidity is part of our framework for thinking about the world at the middle size where we live. Okay, this solidity is an aspect of our world as it presents itself to us, and it's perfectly useful. Somebody said solidity is an illusion. You'd say, well, it's not, and you just bang the table. But then if they told you the scientific story, you might say, well, I can sort of see that, from that scientific point of view, it's not quite what it seems to be. But it's, there's certainly some things are solid and some things are not, like liquids are not solid. Okay. So it's useful in categorizing things. It does work for us, but it maybe doesn't stand up to ultimate scientific scrutiny. And that's kind of how I think about our image of the mind. I think that just as we've rethought the nature of the physical world in the light of modern science, we no longer see it in the way that, say, Descartes did, as little bits of inert matter banging into each other. We now think of it as fields of force and so on. Very counterintuitive and hard to grasp world of quantum effects, entangled particles, space and time, space not being three-dimensional, being curved. We've had to rethink the nature of the physical. I think we need to rethink the nature of the mental world a bit, not just take it that because we have minds and we're in some sense aware of them, we know exactly what they are. There might be illusions in our naive conception of the mind. Indeed, we should expect there to be. We're not equipped with deep insight into the nature of the world around us, nor, I think, deep insight into our own nature. But we have a bunch of ways of thinking about ourselves, ways of talking about ourselves, ways of describing what's happening to us, which are very, very useful, and no one would, well, I certainly wouldn't want people to stop talking about them. But I would just want them perhaps to understand that maybe they can't take them as ultimate, as insights into the ultimate reality of the mind. And I think once you do that, then a lot of the traditional problems that you get when you think about the mind, and this, you have a naive physicalist picture and you have a naive dualist picture, and never the twain shall meet, and you have a hard problem. Well, okay, we've done a lot of rethinking of the physical world. Then we need to do a bit of rethinking, but a lot of people just stick with the naive picture of the mental world. It's this here. I know exactly what it is. It's here in front of me. Bang, there. And one thing that Dan did in a lot of his work was to present thought experiments that show that you're not as sure about this inner world as you think you are. Things like change blindness, for example. Very puzzling phenomenon. Very difficult to see how to describe that. What's happening in case of, I can talk more about that if you need, if you're not familiar with what it is. There are many phenomena there are all sorts of agnosias where people can see objects but can't see movement of objects. What's that like? How do you get a grip on this? The only way really to get a grip on our ordinary everyday framework lets us down, fails us in those cases. You actually need to turn to the science to get a grip of what's going on. That doesn't mean throwing out our everyday picture. It just means getting a deeper understanding and an understanding of why we have that picture. And as I say, not trusting that picture as foundational. So I think I don't think Dan would disagree with anything that I've just said, but maybe he didn't give it so much emphasis, this sort of conciliatory aspect, so much emphasis.
I also think he enjoyed being provocative and, making these really strong claims that would get a conversation going, or maybe get strong pushback, which could then be Socratic in nature, and get people to let go of some of their bullshit,
Well, to some extent, yes, and the name illusionism is actually designed precisely to do that. I could have chosen a more emollient name for it,
Mhm.
that suggested that was much easier for opponents to get on with. But I did want to provoke that. That was the downside of me coming out. I thought,
Right,
it's not
right.
what it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but it does mean that it's maybe not what it seems.
Hmm.
You can't just trust your. I don't think we can trust our naive pre-theoretical intuitions about anything.
Hmm.
Just we're not little gods who have. And the fact that we're talking about ourselves and our own minds doesn't make any difference. Uh, in many ways, we don't know ourselves any better than we know other aspects of the world. Why should we? Um,
Hmm.
we need to, if you think from an evolutionary perspective, we need to deal with the world around us. Dealing with ourselves, which we certainly can do, but it's a more sophisticated activity. An animal, a non-human animal, doesn't like I don't know, a mouse, say, doesn't really need to deal with its own mental states. It needs to deal with the world around it that's impacting that.
Hmm.
It's only
Hmm.
when you get more sophisticated creatures that can actually reflect on their own existence and their own minds and try to control them that they need to develop some sort of self-awareness.
Hmm.
Uh, and we shouldn't expect that to be any more reliable, I think, than our awareness of the world around us. Perhaps less.
I'll confess over the years. Were you done? I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, no,
I
I
didn't
was
want
done. I
to.
was just going to say that was a
Okay.
bit more provocative for you.
Yeah, and I'll confess over the years I was very resistant to what you were proposing, and
Mm.
but if I find overlap and convergence with other ideas that I'm comfortable with, and we can enter some of these into the conversation as we go through the
Oh,
next hour.
absolutely.
Yeah, that I've let I've let down my guardedness because again I like to pretend I'm agnostic about it or agnostic about some things, but yeah, that I don't have any skin in any game, and I can move around and appreciate what people are saying. And I think that's where I've arrived with you is I may not be on board 100% up and down the scale of epistemic certainty or metaphysical commitments or all these kind of things. So that's fine. We all have our space. But I would like to, at this point, for the sake of what you seem to be working in argument against is phenomenal realism. And we can use Nagel's example of what it is likeness and I would ask that maybe we could steelman a couple of points for a moment just to shore up what you're saying. And so to think about with regard to what, say, again, folks, phenomenal realists are saying, that you are saying that there is an assertion of a kind of, as Dennett puts it, a Cartesian theater or kind of mind-body dualism. Do they acknowledge that in their arguments? Do they, let's pick a phenomenal realist, person X, and is that implicit or explicit in their description of a world of qualia and subjective inner qualia,
Mm.
etc.
Mm.
Is that present in their arguments? Are they
That,
supporting
that's
that,
a
or do
very
you think that's a hidden something smuggled in that they're not really acknowledging?
That's a good question, and I think many of them would say that it's not, that they don't, that's a crude caricature of their picture, and that they're not. Now, I think Danthorpe and I tend to agree that they were implicitly committed to something like it, because after all, there are these. No one denies that we can track things that are occurring within us and talk about them. So I'm quite happy to talk about, having pain. Of course, I have pains. There are states that I enter and I don't like being in
Right.
them, and I can tell when I'm in them, and it's horrible, and so on. There's
Hmm.
no one's disputing that. Similarly for experiences of seeing and hearing, I'm aware of things, and I'm aware that I'm aware of them, and I can talk about what it's like to be aware of them. Okay, the question is what's involved in that, what's actually occurring, and the phenomenal realist view is that somehow the stimuli are hitting my sense organs and they're being transduced, converted into patterns of electrical signaling in there. And that electrical signaling is eventually affecting all sorts of systems that modulate my physiological state, other psychological states, creates beliefs, desires, hopes, fears, emotions, and ultimately results in action. Am I doing things? What I do will depend on the context. But phenomenal realists say, yes, all that's happening, sure, but something else is happening. Somehow there is a quality being produced, being created, being generated, or being associated with all this activity in here that is, now that we start using these words, and we, like, well, I said, it's a quality, it's a quality, it's a feel, it's the what it is likeness for me of this experience. And we start to get a bit hand wavy here, because we can't really say anything about these qualities except that they're there, they're very potent, they're powerful, they're real, and it's the yellowiness of yellow, the paininess of the pains, and which phenomenal realists conceive as being something distinct from all the patterns of reactions that are occurring within us, all the patterns of all the change, all the neurological and psychological changes that occur. So there's this quality that is somehow occurring. Okay, now, and then they also say that somehow we're aware of this quality. It's not just occurring in me, like, say, my, I don't know, my blood pressure is in me. I'm aware of it being in me. Okay, so, I mean, there's lots of things happening within me that I'm not at all aware of. We wouldn't need brain scans and tests and things and so on if we knew everything that was happening within us. So this is happening within me somehow, maybe in here, though it doesn't seem to be spatial really. And I'm aware of it. Oh, now, the I here is a bit peculiar because we're not quite sure what this is, but there's a sort of self that's aware of it. And not only that, it's aware of it in a very immediate and direct way. It's not that there's some sort of mechanism that allows the self to detect this, like a qualia detector, like a radiation detector. Somehow the subject, the self, knows its own qualia, knows what it's like to be it in an immediate way. So you have three things here. You have the presentation, you have the qualia, the feel, you have the self that knows it, and there's a relation between them, an epistemic relation between them that is very immediate and direct. Now, I think most phenomenal realists would agree with those things. Now, all the Cartesian theatre viewers just say, okay, there's the show, there's the audience, and there's the relation between them. So it's just making vivid in a metaphorical way what is implicit in the picture. If you take away any of those elements, if you take away the qualia, obviously the picture collapses. If you take away the subject that's aware of the qualia, if you just say they're qualia but nobody's aware of them, like a TV playing in an empty room, well, then how do we even know we have them? So they've got to be the qualia, we've got to be the subject that's aware of them, and there's got to be this awareness relation between them. If the subject was there and the qualia were there, but they were in complete ignorance, the subject was in complete ignorance of the qualia, you wouldn't have the picture. So it seems that the Cartesian theatre picture is implicit, it seems to me, in what I call phenomenal reason. In fact, I've been inclined to define phenomenal realism as a view in which that picture is implicit. Take away any of the three elements and I'm not sure you have it. And Dan thought not only that dualistically minded people have this picture, but also that many physicalists still have it. And they're struggling to explain how the brain creates this Cartesian theatre. And they're trying to do it in terms of activities in the brain. And he thought, quite rightly, I think that was hopeless. There, I'm in complete agreement with the dualists. You can't explain this Cartesian theatre in, if you like, naturalistic terms, or at least in naturalistic terms as we conceive of them within cognitive science at the moment. So the only alternative really is to say that it's an illusion, that it isn't really a Cartesian theory. It's just that it seems to us in some sense that there is. We are certainly tracking things that are happening within us. We have experiences, and where experiences are interactions with the world or with our own bodies. We can recognize when we enter these states, we can say things about these states, and we can describe them using this vocabulary of what it's like. That's all fine. But we conceptualize it as a sort of private world, the world of the Cartesian theatre, that is somehow separate from everything else that's happening in us. And that's the bit where we go wrong. It's a naive conceptualization of something that's real, but much more complicated and that isn't distinct from all the other things that are happening within us.
Excuse me, would you be comfortable if I did a little thought model here and I said, okay, we have phenomenal realism and what we could call strong qualia, and then over here we have your framework, illusionism. Now, if I were to come down here to what we are calling qualia, and there's a scale here. Could we tone down the strength of that qualia? It could be a pseudo-qualia. It could be a semantic qualia for the sake of argument or for the sake of our folksy intuition. Or, as you said, the necessitation of this convenient fiction or this narrative to say, so would you grant that in illusionism that we can still make space for X, whether it's a quasi-qualia or a weak qualia or the narrative, the semantic genesis of a story that there are. So in other words, we're not granting the hardness of that, what you just described that the phenomenal realist is proposing. What would you put in that space, that vacuum that's created?
I mean, I've used the term zero qualia. I think that some people try to operate with a notion of kind of in-between qualia that is kind of tries to keep the the intuition behind strong qualia, but tries to dispense with many of the features of strong qualia while insisting that it's still something that you can't simply explain in terms of the patterns of reactivity and so on. Mm-hmm. I think that's just a fudge. I don't think that's going away. But I'm quite happy to keep the notion of qualia as you say, a fictional notion. And indeed, Dan was quite happy with this. I could call the view fictionalism. Dan's idea was that consciousness is a sort of story we're telling ourselves about what's occurring within us. And it's told in a language of sort of the Cartesian theatre sort of language. I'm directly aware of this what its likeness, this feel. It's a story we're articulating to ourselves. And as we articulate it, we actually bring things into the world of this Cartesian theatre, as it were, by questioning ourselves. Bits of information flare up into what Dan called neural fame. We actually construct the story to some extent for ourselves by attending to this or that, or asking ourselves, what's that like? We, as it were, bring bits of information to neural prominence, particularly to make them accessible to our speech, because we're asking ourselves something. So the brain thinks, better come up with an answer to that. What can I see there? What can I see there? The brain needs to come up with an answer. It finds something, it brings it. And by bringing it in that way, it seems to us that it's kind of immediately present to us, and we incorporate it into the story. And so in a way, it's a story that we're creating as we go along about our inner lives, told in the language of qualia. And I'm quite happy to have qualia, and Dan was, as what philosophers call intentional objects, like Sherlock Holmes. Okay, you can talk about Sherlock Holmes, you can tell stories about Sherlock Holmes. There are things that were true of Sherlock Holmes and things that weren't true about him. He lived at 221b, not at 222, and so on. Within that story, there are all sorts of interesting things you can tell. Now, it could even be that story tracked indirectly some real features. I mean, Sherlock Holmes was, I think, based on a real medical professor, I think, who had taught Conan Doyle. I can't remember his name. So it could be even that the story tracks events that really happened. And certainly many stories are like that. They're disguised versions of real events. And that's how I'd think about a story we tell about the mind. So fictionalism would be an alternative word, though that brings with it its own bunch of problems, because people say, what, you're saying we just make it up? No, not really, because there's a basis to all of this storytelling. But so yes, I'm not proposing that there are people who would say that we should just do away with this language as a relic of a bad philosophy. Dan would say that, I think, in some moods. Pete Mandic, I think, would say it quite strongly. But I'm inclined to say no. It's serving a useful function for us. In a way, I like to compare it to things like poetry. Is poetry true? No. I mean, a lot of it's just, it's fantasy, but it can express real things and real, very important things, things that are important to us, to our humanity. And I'm inclined to say the same about the language used to describe the mind. And there might be, I would just occur to me, there might be analogies with the way that some people think of religious doctrines, that you don't have to actually literally believe in miracles, but they can express something deeply important to you all the same. So that's, yeah, and that I think is different from the more, sort of hard-minded eliminatives. I don't disagree with them about the actual metaphysics, but I think we can be more tolerant the framework of this framework, that this everyday framework.
And I think your point to poetry is that it's undergirded by semiotics and metaphor and the imaginal, and so it elicits in us or it evokes feelings and emotions effectively. And and of course we could get into an illusionist description of what those, but to the point that your metaphor. I like your metaphor there. What I think we should do is, oh, gosh, we've already got a half an hour. Is I want to bring in. And speaking of undergirding, I think your work is undergirded by an appeal to functionalism, right? And I don't know if it's a particular species of functionalism. Is that correct? Am I saying that properly? And then I'll have a second follow-up to that.
Yes, in a very broad sense of functionalism.
Okay.
Functionalism is sometimes understood. Sometimes people understand functionalism as the view that you can sort of carve up the mind into using everyday categories like beliefs, perceptions, and emotions, and different emotions, and desires and intentions, and you think of these as functional states that have a kind of discrete neural realization in each case. That sort of functionalism, I think, is way too crude. The functionalism that I endorse, and again, this is the one that Dan endorsed, is simply the view that it's what things do that matters, not what they're made of. So brain tissue doesn't have any magical properties in virtue of its being brain tissue. What makes it that support a mind is what it does, the activity that it's supporting, the complex way in which it's mediating between stimuli and all the resultant effects. Now, it may be that is very, very fine-grained, that there are some things that neural tissue is doing that can only be done by stuff with the very same fine-grained structure, that you need actually certain highly detailed complex patterns of neuronal connectivity to get those effects, and that you just really couldn't replicate that in some other, say, artificial system and still get the same effects, because the effects are so subtle, so complex, that you need that particular kind of material to get them. Okay, so and neuroscientists would insist on that. They'd say, look, it's the way that it's doing it. It's the particular way that this bit of neural tissue is doing it that matters. Yes, I agree totally. That's a function of perspective. But if, perhaps per impossibile, you could get an artificial system to do exactly the same things, to process stimuli in exactly the same way, then it would support the same mental states. There's no intrinsic magic about this sort of carbon-based, complex carbon-based molecules that make it support a mind. It's just what they're able to do. Similarly, if you could realize what's happening in my computer in biological tissue, then I would be supporting the same. I'm doing the same things as the computer. I'd be able to run all the programs on my own brain. So the difference between people who emphasize the fine-grained neural, I have no quarrel with people who emphasize the fine-grained neural detail. But my insistence is that it only matters insofar as it makes a difference to what the system can do.
And that may help bridge into this the second part, or this next question that I have is, as I understand your system, when we have an external world, sense data is being provided to us by sensory input through our sense organs. And I think that is level one of your illusionist theoretical framework, is that we have raw sense data being provided to us. And I think you call that the reactive schema, that there is onboarding of data, of information. And what I would ask, and that's where I would interpret you as having the seat or consciousness, however you want to define that, is in this level, in this, if you want to call it, interaction with the environment. So eyes, smell, taste, feel, all these things going on at this subpersonal level. What would you propose is out there in the external? That's a big question. What would you propose is in the external world that this first order of onboarding is, I don't want to say experiencing, but what is that data that it is onboarding, that is being provided to it by the environment? So I'll narrow that question down. If there is a tree in front of this organic system, with presuming I can see and smell and taste and all that, I see the tree with we'll start with visual, or I may, tactile. I may touch the bark of the tree. What is that tree out there with regard to its status as a substance that possesses properties? We don't have to say qualitative properties, but they possess properties. And then to hopefully not abuse this question or belabor it, we'll go to the second part of illusionism, which is to say that there's the affective, introspective, assessing the relevant celebrity that arises, or the relevance that comes to the fore in that moment, that the reactive schema provides the brain system, or whatever we want to call it, that then gives me the possibility to interpret brown bark, rough, fine leaves, green. So anyway, if that makes sense as a question, what is out there in the environment? What is that tree, absent of qualitative value, that we just so intuitively take for granted?
Wow, well, you've kind of asked me to sketch a sort of full-blown metaphysical reality there.
I'm so sorry. It's a really crazy question, deep, crazy question. But I think it gets us to a place where people who are skeptical of you can, or this idea can say, "Oh, okay, I see what he's doing here."
Well, look, let's just start with common sense. There's a tree there. A dog could see the tree, that could react to it. It's something separate from the organism that the organism can interact with. It's some things that are around us are significant for us. Food's significant for us. Predators are significant for us. So evolution has tuned us into signals of these things. So we're particularly, we're not, for instance, humans are not tuned into magnetic fields. Seems pigeons are, because they navigate by them. Okay, so there's all this stuff around us. Okay, and intuitively, it's distinct from us. It's not part of us. There's a sort of boundary around us with the skin, and we're trying to maintain what the evolution wants us to do, as it were, is to maintain the sort of the integrity and the viability of this being that we are. That's kind of what natural selection has been working at for billions of years, from the first single-celled organism. And there's all this stuff around us, and what evolution has done is given us abilities to suss out bits of it that might be important for us. But it's not given us detectors for specific foods. It's given us detectors for the kind of properties that signal food, like color properties. But again, only for a certain range of those. It's not given us abilities to detect ultraviolet, for instance, maybe. Whereas other animals, bees, for instance, do, because that helps them. So we're selectively attentive to this world around us in a way that's broadly adaptive. Okay? And our sensory systems suss out bits of the world that are important for us, and then the reactive side is how our nervous systems react to those things. Are they attractive? Are they repellent? Do we want to? Do they conjure up different associations, memories, thoughts, whatever, decisions, beliefs? Do they motivate us to flee, to flee, or to go towards it? All sorts. We could do this in immense detail. Every stimulus triggers myriads of subtle reactions at different levels that kind of retune our engagement with the world. So maybe one side of one thing subtly changes our expectations of what we'll see next, so that we can anticipate. This is a sort of picture that's predictive processing theory built on. Our brains are continually sort of adapting our engagement with the world in a way that will hopefully be adaptive and help us flourish. Okay. Now, what's the stuff out there? Well, to begin with, we start doing science on it. We start sort of trying to, we can do things like, we can do, if it's a rock, we can do chemistry on it and try and see what chemical composition of it is. And so that's what we have science for. What is it fundamentally? What is its fundamental nature? Well, science we can move from doing chemistry or whatever, or biology if it's a tree, we can move to doing physics on it, and we can move down to doing microphysics and talking about the subatomic particles. We maybe even get down to quantum descriptions of a universal wave function that's evolving. And that's about where we sort of pan out. And then what's the quantum wave function? That's kind of the best we can do. Now, does something more fundamental? Does the quantum wave function, these fundamental descriptions, describe something else? We've no way of knowing. I mean, we've run out of, every question has to be framed within some sort of context of inquiry where there's a possible answer. Now, if you're getting to the point where you're saying, well, these seem to be the fundamental elements, asking any more questions, there's just no context or means to answer them. I know some people would like to say, well, there has to be something there that's fundamentally grounding it all. And the only thing I can think of is consciousness. I just don't see consciousness in that way. I see consciousness as a very complex, high-level interaction with the world around us. I don't see it as something that can perform this ultimate grounding function. Now, if you want there to be something, you could call it, I don't know, just make up a name for it. The fundamental stuff. If you really think you want to be, but I don't think it's got anything to do with our minds. I think our minds are products of highly complex, evolved systems. It would be like saying the fundamental stuff is digestion, which is another highly complex function, which is actually very intimately related with cognition. We now know that there are a lot of neurons in the gut, and the relations between what the gut is doing, what the brain is doing, are very complex and intertwined. So you're going to say, well, maybe the fundamental thing in the world is digestion. That's comical. To me, it seems almost as comical to say that it's consciousness, or that it's thinking, or that it's anything like this. It's whatever it is. I don't know. We just inquire. I mean, you could say that it's God or whatever. I mean, but all you're doing really is gesturing at your. We feel a need to ask a question that cannot be answered, and so we come up with some naive answer to it.
Right.
And
right.
Want to, it doesn't make any difference to anything. And I don't think it's getting you anything more than a mere word to put in that slot.
Right. Right. And as a follow-up to that, so what I was looking for was if the basal or base onboarding of that sense data, does the tree possess it possesses a color temperature, it possesses a hue, perhaps, but is that hue only afforded to us in awareness or perception at that second order of processing that you talk about? Well, so in other words, the basal, the reactive schema portion, is it interpreting color hues, but in its own, again, scientifically valid and, no magic, just that it's taking in wavelengths of light, or that the tactile nature is feeling friction of degrees, smoothness of degrees?
Well, look, these are things, this language talking about hues and wavelengths and so on, this is something that we people do. There's a little man in our brain thinking, what's the hue of that, and what's the wavelength of that, and how are the two related, and these sorts of things. The brain is doing what it's doing. Okay, so it's I think you used the word sensory data. I don't think of it as sensory data. What's happening is the stimulation of our sense organs. We're bombarded by stimuli all the time, far more stimuli than we can possibly process. Visual, auditory, olfactory, all sorts of stimuli, interoceptive. And the brain's job is to kind of make some sort of sense of this. And its job isn't to create an internal picture of the world. What the heck would it need that? what it needs to do, it's got the world, okay? The world's all there and it's bombarding it with stimuli. But no point in creating a sort of internal picture of this world and then trying to react to that. That's just making the task doubly difficult. It's got the world, it's got there. The question is, what does it do with the world? How does it reorient itself, reorient the organism with respect to the world? And it's got all these signals coming in that are not in what we call hues or whatever. They're just, the patterns of electromagnetic radiation, whatever. They're stimulating in the case of vision, they're stimulating our retinas. Already the retina starts filtering out loads of this stuff because there's way more than you can handle. Then that goes to other systems. What is the lateral?
The cortical cortex,
before it goes there, it goes to a way station before it goes to there.
Okay.
And then it goes into, then there's another stream, dorsal ventral streams. It splits up into different things. There isn't any place to it saying, let's construct a picture of the world, let's color it in with different hues, like a painter would do. It's not like a painter's got a canvas there saying what hues to get. No, it's nothing like that's happening. All that's happening is vast waves of neural activity occurring. Some of them occurring in parallel, some of them splitting, some of them recombining, all sorts of stuff. And that's then modulating all sorts of responses to the world internally. It's reconfiguring our mental orientation to the world, also having physiological effects. And in creatures and that's what I call experience. That's what experience is. It's the world hitting us.
Yeah.
And as it were, making our brains sing a certain sort of tune, if we're going to be metaphorical. Let's use it. It's like hitting a bell and a note occurs. It hits, and there's this huge wave of complex vibration across multiple brain areas. And that is the experience. Now, we also have some sort of self-awareness. We humans, at least, we can have some sense of the shape of this vibration, of the nature of it, of whether it's a positive vibration or a negative vibration. Whether it's pulling us or pushing us, whether it's making us excited or depressed, whether it's recalling things from the past or pushing us into the future, whether it's tempting and so on. We have a sense of the shape of this. This is what I call the reactivity pattern. We have a sense of that. And we say, oh, look, this stimulus, this thing, it's doing that to me. It's making me have that sense of, I don't know, maybe nostalgia, and now we're using words. And it has that particular hue and color, or the flavor reminds me of, and we're articulating it now in our language of hues and colors and things. We're telling the story about what's happening within us. And that's where all the richness of, as it were, the hues and the colors and things in this picture that we're creating. And the picture seems immediately present to us because after all, the feeling is immediately present. It is our innermost existence is what's happening in here. That is our resonance with the world. And we were aware of how we are resonating with the world. And we try to describe it in this language that ultimately comes out of stuff like qualia when we try and regularize it. And that's okay. Just don't mistake that language for actual world distinct from all that complex resonance.
I should have disclaimed, because I am hamstrung by language, to ask you the question in the first place, but I think I sussed out of what you just said that, again, I'm appealing to that first order of, let's say, interaction with a living system, the Markov blanket, et cetera, interacting in a world replete with EM scales and frequencies and things like that. So the question, if I readdress it, is to say, is it energy information matrix? Is it the EM spectrum? What the carrier wave, if you will, the carrier between the object and the observer is definable through the physical sciences. And that's kind of what the spirit of the question was. It wasn't so much like after the fact, I'm describing Calvin or, Hughes or that. I understand that. I understand that's the second order. That is above the subpersonal. So I probably didn't frame the question properly. So again, and I think I answered my question through your explanation that you just provided, is that the tree exists, that there are things going on. There's photons, there's all these things happening in the physical world, and as you said, through the narrative of evolution, that this living system in its niche evolved to onboard, then interpret. So what I was asking though is that between the tree and this instance, me observing the tree, that what is being provided in that space between the tree and myself is EM, is it energy information? a la the EM or the electromagnetic spectrum, replete again with heat and color, all these things that we then add on, afterwards. So that's what I was kind of asking was like, is it just a stream of energy, an energy information matrix that is then landing on the retina or hitting my eardrum or touching the skin that then can be reinterpreted into a comprehensible or comprehensible rather interpretation of that which is exterior to me.
Well, I
So
mean,
that's kind of where I was
the actual
going.
nature of the proximal stimuli. This is a scientific question. I mean, take smell. I mean, you might say, well, smell, it's airborne molecules. It's actually very complicated what smell is, and the relation between the odor, the cloud of odor molecules, and the sensations we describe ourselves as having. It's very complex and counterintuitive. Very hard to describe. There's a wonderful book by Anne-Sophie Birch called Smellosophy, which really gets down into. So you really need to look, you need to get into the details of this. I don't think there's a general answer to that question. I mean, just a simple thing, very simple point that taste is to a large extent smell. If you lose your sense of smell, then things you can't taste as well. The things are interconnected. If you ask about the physics of vision, then then you need to talk to a specialist about that. But I'm kind of not seeing the philosophical question here. I mean, there's a story to be told about how objects reflect light or produce sound waves bounce off them, and how our senses are stimulated by them. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any sort of metaphysical. I mean, you might want to talk about the issue of how they carry information. And we could get into issues about information theory and so on. And there's certainly some good sense in which they carry information. But if you're talking about carrying things like the felt qualities, then that's
my motive. Is I'm trying to head off. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'll just interject for a second. My motive is to head off a claim in YouTube land that somebody's saying, well, that tree's brown and it has green leaves, and it's so patently obvious that that tree is brown and has green leaves. But what I'm suggesting is there is an object external to me that has definable, whatever it is, it's definable. And we don't want to speak to qualities just yet. We want to speak to physical assemblages of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, sulfur, all these things. And then we want to speak to the carrier, that is the photons, it is the energy information matrix, whatever it is that's going on in reality. And I'm agnostic to, I don't care. It's just that what I wanted to do was head off that question, like, oh, there's a tree out there and it has green leaves if it's in the summertime.
Okay, look, let's start with a naive question. Okay, naive question. Where's the greenness? Where's the brownness of the trunk? Naive question, naive answer, out there on the tree, right? Then you do a bit of philosophy and you realize that some people are colorblind, that animals see colors differently from us, things look different in different colored lights and so on and so forth. And you think, well, it can't really be out there. And then you talk to some scientists and they say, well, all that's really out there is a certain reflectance profile of the physical surface. They just reflect light. So you say the brownness isn't really out there. The greenness isn't really out there. So you say, oh, wow, that's quite a stunner, because it definitely seems to be out there. I mean, it certainly doesn't seem to be over here. It seems to be over there, right? But scientists have told me this, and I've done these little thought experiments in my mind, and so it can't be. And surprisingly, many people just accept that. I don't think they should. So then you say, well, where is it then? Well, there's only one other place it could be. It's going to be in here somehow. Somehow, the electromagnetic radiation coming from the thing has somehow created this quality in me. But where? Because after all, when you look at something green, no bit of your brain turns green, and there's no eye in there to see it if it did. So, and the brain's no more coloured in that way than any other part of the physical world is. So it seems to have to belong to a non-physical world. So you see this greenness, if it's not part of the thing up there and it's not part of your brain, then it's got to belong to a non-physical world with dualists or of some kind of bad thing, solved it. my whole thing is to say, no, it's where is the greenness, brownness? It's neither out there nor in here, and it's both out there and in here. Because what we're capturing when we talk about the colors of the things is how those things are affecting us. The talk is a talk about the interaction between us. That thing might, other creatures with other sensory systems might interact with things very differently, and it wouldn't, they wouldn't call it brown, okay? So it's expressing I talked about this with the resonance, how the world strikes us like a bell and produces a note. That talk about brownness is about the note that thing's striking in us. Now that note shouldn't be described in the same terms we describe the color of the tree. It's not that it creates an actual brownness in us like the brownness we're describing it, we're attributing to the tree. It's the brownness is our way of talking about the complex resonance that surface under this illumination creates in me, and it may be shaped by many factors. For instance, suppose, let's take, I've used this example, suppose I have bananas make me violently ill. So I just loathe bananas. Now it's quite possible that when I look at other yellow things, their yellowness will strike me in a different way to the way it does you, because they will remind me instantly of bananas. And so what it's like for me to see what's something else that's yellow, a yellow cup, say, will be different from what it's like for you to see a yellow cup. Not because the light is different, but because it creates a different note in me, a note that is coloured, if you like, by all my past horrible interactions with bananas.
The operant conditioning.
Exactly. So what I want to say is, your initial intuition that it's out there isn't wrong, and your sense that somehow it's in here isn't wrong. But in neither place is it a simple, pure quality that's either painted on the thing in there or somehow magically occurring in here. It's me interacting with that thing. It's me being part of the world. And that's why idealism doesn't work, because it fails to see that there's that it's an interactive process between me and the world. It's not all in me.
That's the answer I wanted from you. Sorry that I didn't get to it. I didn't bite into it in the first attempt, but I think, maybe you see where I was trying to go with that is, you know, that according to, again, your theoretical framework, and I'm not disagreeing with it. I know it's that we can't take for granted that there is this greenness out there and this brownness out there, even though, like you said, it's like like a Heraclitean kind of proposition. You know, it's like the union of opposites, which Westerners are terrible at. You know, to have this kind of tension, this tonos, as John Vervaeke would say, and that opponent processing that goes on in our sense making and onboarding and so forth. Now,
and crucially, in our downstream reactions, it's not all in the sensory part. It's not all in this immediate. It doesn't all happen in your visual cortex. It happens. It's the whole, the whole show, the whole carnival of reactions that are carrying you.
Yeah. And to be provocative and perhaps polemical, and you mentioned idealism, and I've talked to people like Bernardo Castro, I've not talked to Don Hoffman, but they both use these metaphors and these analogies that there is this dashboard of perception, or the helmet that I think Hoffman talks about, which there may not be overlap or convergence, but you know, I think they're pointing to similar things that we don't have to, and that almost brings me to a question: is there any at all overlap with representationalism with illusionism? I know syntactically there are some differences, etc., but do you grant any charity to people who speak to representationalism in a certain way? Is that
It depends what you mean by representations, and it's used in many different ways, and in some ways.
Okay, yeah. Well, pick a species of representationalism that you think might be adjacent to what you're.
Well, just take this interface view. Take this interface. I think that's what you mean. I don't think we're confronted with what are we here with an interface of some sort. Now, and then the world is our interpretation of what's being sort of displayed on the interface.
Well, it tends to refute realism, and it tends to suggest that it is illusory, that you have to have this interface protocol, or whatever you want to call it, to discern the brownness of brown or the greenness of green, or to construct it.
I know we need an interface, and if we did have an interface, we'd have all of the problems about how we react to the tree would simply be recur in how we react to the interface display of the tree. We don't need an intervening display of reality. We have reality itself. It's there. Just interact with it. Why on earth would evolution have created a sort of replica of the outside world, maybe rendered in a different way? So that's rendered in whatever, whether it's rendered in sort of colorless, atoms or whatever, or it's rendered in conscious minds or goodness knows what. Then evolution creates this other object for us to have a look at, and now we've got to we need senses now to perceive that and interpret that and react to that. In the end, it doesn't matter. What matters is how we react to one or the other. You don't need this interface. What is this interface? It's not.
Well, it's an abstract interface. It's a theoretical thought model. But so I don't want to straw man this interface. But what I see in your proposition, in your framework, is that there is the first order subpersonal acquisition of sense data or whatever it is, and that then there is an interpretation in a affective, introspective, and if you don't mind my saying, a psychological analysis that is a relevance realization virtual machinery that extracts from that information that which has precedent in that moment, in that interface moment. So if that's not anywhere nearly analogous to a interface mediator or whatever that they might be inferring with or instantiating with the idea of a dashboard or a helmet. And again, these are abstract metaphors, and we could twist them and bend them in different ways. I was just checking to see if there's any overlap or convergence.
I don't see it like that. No, I don't see it like that. There's actually three. Well, and I don't. So what you're suggesting is there's a sort of sensory inputs, there's the processing of those inputs and the interpretation of them, and this is where I think the illusion occurs. That's not the illusion occurs at a higher level when we introspect on all of this, and there isn't that sort of, again, this is slipping back in the Cartesian theory thing. The idea isn't that senses process stimuli and sort of put it all together and create a sort of unified model of it, which is then reacted to. No, the reactions start happening right at the beginning. Remember, the retina already starts filtering out some information. Reaction starts immediately. Reaction is occurring right. There isn't a process of this idea that we have to construct an inner model of the world. I mean, there may be ways in which the brain does construct models at the moment, but certainly not at a
predictive processing.
But yeah, for conscious appreciation, all of this is subpersonal. And there's no reason to think that it has to be done all in a kind of unified and integrated way, and all the different streams of information have to be slotted together into a unified. There's no need. Just start reacting. If something's flying towards you quickly, just duck. Don't bother worrying about its color and its texture and all of these things. So reaction starts right the moment that stimuli hit our retina or our sense organs rather, and it proceeds in multiple different channels, some overlapping, some whatever, and all the time react. As soon as there's something to react to, the brain reacts. It doesn't wait until it's got the complete picture. I mean, that would be a terrible strategy. So it's
if we grant outlier pathologies as exceptions,
but so the interaction and the sort of the incoming and the outcome, they're totally.
There's no latency period there.
There's no sort of central point. This is again the Cartesian theory idea. Is with some place where it all comes together. This was Dan's what he meant by Cartesian materialism. Cartesian materialism, where materialists who didn't think this was non-physical still thought there had to be some place where all the physical information came together. There's no need for that at all. You just need, as soon as there's something to react to, get the reactions going. So what you have is a complex web of sensitivity and reactivity. And that's also personal, if you like. Now, our picture of this as a presentation and a reaction comes from our ability to introspect and to monitor this, and the way we try to conceptualize it. And when we introspect, what we are picking up on, I suggest, is not just the sensitive side, but the reactive side. And we sense that this stimulus, whatever it is we're looking at, is having a certain global effect on us. an effect that we can't articulate because it's multi-dimensional, but we have a sense of its overall character. And we say, it's that effect. And that's what we're gesturing at. And that effect is being presented to me, because I'm sort of monitoring how I am, okay? So this is me being affected by the world. And that's what we gesture at with talk of qualia and so on. So there's absolutely no interface in any of this. The only way we might talk about an interface is of the introspective systems on the whole pattern of first order activity. I suspect that introspection is, I don't want to say that it's uniquely human, but it's highly developed in humans. Other animals are just operating at this level of immediate reactivity. They're still conscious. I won't say that that's consciousness. What this gives us is a certain way of conceptualizing our consciousness in the phenomenal terms, in terms of a direct presentation to us. So I think there's a big difference there between I see as much more directly plugged into the world itself. These loops of sensitivity and reactivity, they reach out into the world and bind us closely to it. There's nowhere they're sealed off into a private mental world. That's what I'm resisting. It's this isolation of us behind some kind of interface. So that a phrase I use, and I'm going to use it as a book title, is Descartes' prison. The idea that we're imprisoned behind a veil, what used to be called, an indirect realist, a veil of perception. No, the world is much more real to us. We're much more plugged into it, and similarly for other people who are part of that world. If we attend to them carefully enough, we can know their minds directly. If you know someone really, really well, sometimes you can know what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, what it's like to be them better than they can. I expect that an expert on bats, somebody who's studied bats their whole life, might know what it's like to be a bat better than a bat could. Because after all, bats aren't particularly reflective creatures, I think. If you ask them to give a description of what it's like for them, they can't do it. They don't have the concepts. They don't know what it's like to be a bat. They just live what it's like to be a bat. Okay, as someone who really studied bat in their ecological context and studied their physiology, their neurophysiology, their neuropsychology, and so on, they could know what it's like to be a bat better than a bat could, in my view. They all got it completely wrong.
Well, I would appeal to Michael Levin's cognitive light cone in that regard too, that the bat has a very small cognitive light cone. It only cares about, its immediate surroundings. It's the next few minutes of its life and doesn't really regret or reflect on anything. But the human who is studying the bat has a huge cognitive light cone and can use the cognitive power of empathy and the cognitive power of imagination, et cetera, to like you said, to really define bat-like qualities. And maybe imagine, again, that's where people shrug off the imagination, but you can imagine a bat in its existence,
Well,
maybe not 100%.
But that's a practical limitation. I'm saying that the story about our inner lives, about the show and the Cartesian, that's a sort of fiction. I'm saying we can probably, someone who's really studied bats can tell that fiction about bats in a way that a bat, of course, themselves never could. We could, as it were, create that inner life for a bat that it itself is at the best only dimly aware of. We could imagine being a bat better than a bat could.
Yeah. No, I don't think that's too controversial. With occasional hair splitting, maybe.
I think a lot of people think it was.
Well, it's provocative, but I think I'm lensing it a particular way, and I think I'm in sympathy with you when I lens it this way. But now what I'd like to say, Keith, is we're about 8 minutes after the hour. We started about an hour ago. I want to bring us in for a landing, and I would love to have you back. I didn't even scratch the surface. You wrote a paper on the ethical implications of illusionism that I wanted to address. I want to talk about active inference, predictive processing, free energy principle, all that kind of stuff, because I sense compatibility in some regard with what you're proposing. So I got all this stuff unfinished, hosty, questiony things that I want to do. But let me ask you one. one more kind of provocative question, and then I want you to take the floor and have a closing statement. And if this was a good experience for you, I would love to have you back when it's convenient for you and you're feeling up to conversing. So, my quick little question is, in having listened to the Friston camp and guys like Mike Levin and so forth, I've kind of let go a lot of my notions of consciousness, and I'm more interested in cognition and problem solving and in what we call intelligence, diverse problem solving. That to me is where there's a lot more interesting stuff going on. And you said something in a conversation about rather than redness, it's redding. And what I love about that is I look at consciousness more as a verb, that we are, we are intelligencing, but we are also consciousing, if that, sorry, linguists, but we are consciousing, and I'm so at peace with that. Rather than trying to build all these, either just eliminate it or build it up to some godlike, thing, that consciousing is part of the creole of intelligencing and cognizing and stuff like it. What do you think about that? And then please give us a parting statement, some thoughts related to whatever you find salient and relevant.
Well, I like that term, reading. It is taken from the work of my friend Nicholas Humphrey, who has written a wonderful series of books, Seeing Red, Soul Dust, more recently Sentience. Lovely series of books, and very much encourage you to read them. Nick's views and mine, I think, are very close, though Nick tends to use a phenomenal realist vocabulary, which I don't totally approve of, but that is a terminological difference. He thinks I'm putting people off. But his view is I mean, I would say it's robustly physicalist, though I'm a bit wary of that word because it rings alarm bells that it needn't ring. My physicalism is quite relaxed. But what he lays stress on is that experience is a reaction to the world. Yes, it's a reaction that's provoked by stimuli, but but it's not just a passive gathering of information like a TV camera connected to a computer could do. These stimuli matter to us. That's the whole point. In the way they don't matter to a computer, because the computer's got no interests, it's got no goals, it's got no desires, it's got no stake in the world. And one thing evolution has given us over billions of years is a stake in the world. It's given us a whole set of, imperatives. First of all, to survive and to keep the show on the road. So we're deeply invested in the world, and stimuli matter to us. And it's that mattering, I think, that we're gesturing at when we talk about what experience is like. Dan Dennett had this wonderful question. He said, okay, suppose you've told a story. Information comes in, right, in the senses, and somehow it's processed, and somehow it gets into consciousness. Bang, it's into consciousness. Lovely. Then Dan said, and then what happens? So it's gone into consciousness. There's this wonderful inner show of consciousness. The fireworks have gone off. What happens then? Well, you've got to react to it some way. If you don't react, it's just like a TV going off and playing in an empty room and there's no reaction to it, then there was no point in the whole thing. And the reactions are themselves going to have to be neurally modulated. So why not just cut out the fireworks and just plug the sort of incoming sensor stuff direct into the reactions? It's the reactions where the action is. That's where the mattering occurs. And just a show of intrinsic qualia just wouldn't matter in itself. It's just... that's inert. Okay, it's the reaction to it. It's the way it affects you. It's the vibration, the resonance it sets up in your whole being. That's where the heart of consciousness lies. And so, yes, reading. It's me responding readily to the world. It's me responding treely to the tree, or brownly to the tree, or whatever. And of course, hallucinations occur when we start reading when there isn't something read there, when we start treeing when there isn't a tree there. Okay, right. No need for an inner tree. It's just that something has inadvertently sparked off the treeing when there was no tree. Now, as to one moral I would suggest to people, I would suggest this: look, we're in a very, very unusual period of time. Things are changing very rapidly. We're getting artificial intelligences. We're merging some of our own cognitive functions with artifacts. We're extending them I mean, we've been doing this actually for a long, long time. I mean, the culture is all an extension, as it were, of our own cognitive capacities. We've been doing, that's what's distinctive of humans, but it's accelerating rapidly now. And this is going to face us with old questions in new guises, and with new questions, with old questions in new guises, and we're going to have to get a handle on it really quickly. So be open to new ways of thinking about it. We have strong intuitions about our own minds. We have strong intuitions about the world around us. They're not always reliable. You don't have to give them up. You don't have to throw them out and stop thinking of yourself that way. But maybe ask yourself if they, in what context they can be trusted. There's a way of thinking about the mind where the question is of whether an AI is conscious simply cannot be answered, because it's about something wholly private to the AI, if it exists, and you can never know. That's a bad way of thinking about it. It's a completely impractical way of thinking, even if it were true, because you'd never be able to answer it. So you've located, there's a tendency to locate the source of ethical value in this private, inaccessible thing. In this conscious private world of consciousness, and then to make the question of whether a creature possesses it unanswerable. That's a really bad way of going about it. And the same with other animals. Be open to a rethinking that is both well motivated theoretically and opens up the possibilities for dealing with these questions makes them much more tractable to investigation. Just be open to this. You're not going to lose anything. You're not going to become less than you were. You're not going to lose any essence or any freedom that you had before, but you might understand it better and understand your place in the world better. And that's what we're all striving for. A bit inarticulate as a summary, but that's the best I could do after an hour.
Please. In fact, I teased out the idea that you had addressed some of the, I guess, accusations against your theoretical framework about ethical, yeah, the whole minefield of ethics. And so, again, if this was a good experience, we could talk after we're done recording. But thank you for that. I'm not going to say much more after that. I very much appreciate that closing statement, and I want to kind of leave on that note. So to the YouTube audience, thank you very much. If you've made it this far, here's good news. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and then I'm going to come on with Matthew Siegel and Keith Frankish, and they're going to have a conversation, and I'm going to be quiet and listen and be the first audience member to enjoy the conversation. Keith, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your thoughts. I appreciate it. I follow you on the Blue Sky now, and I very much enjoy watching you tussle with people and also, come up with these ideas. So thank you for that. I
thank you, Justin. It was a pleasure talking to you. Really. Absolutely.
Good. Well, it's an honor to have you on board, so I appreciate it. So I'll say goodbye to you after we stop recording, then I'm gonna let you go so you can go take a break and rest yourself.
Okay.
Thank you, YouTube audience too. And I'm uploading both these conversations today, so you have that to look forward to.